Good Friday morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the very first launch of the CNBC Africa Special Report Series. My name is Fifi Peters, and I am coming to you with my audience and with my expert panel, which you will meet in just a short while from the headquarters of CNBC Africa in Johannesburg, South Africa. The purpose of the launch of this special report series, it's going to be a series that we'll be conducting on a monthly basis, a series that we will be inviting leaders from government, captains of industry, and also stakeholders in society to essentially continue conversations on various topics aimed at driving the growth and development agenda of the African continent. We are kicking off the very first series today with the debrief of the World Economic Forum. You would be aware, if you're not aware, but the World Economic Forum recently happened in Davos, Switzerland. And the purpose of today's discussion is just to highlight some of the key themes and outcomes that were discussed on the icy but not so cold Swiss Alps this time around. And I'm sure the element of temperature and climate will come up in the discussion that we're about to have. We're discussing those themes and the outcomes to ensure that we highlight and we double click on the commitments made by leaders from government as well as business to drive sustainable and inclusive growth, such that those commitments do not fade away or get left behind. So as a reminder of all the events, of course, that did take place at the World Economic Forum, here is a quick scene setter.
The 55th World Economic Forum, themed Collaboration for the Intelligent Age, addressed essential components necessary for fostering economic development. The discussions encompassed reimagining growth, rebuilding trust, protecting the environment, and investing in human capital. With a significant presence at Davos, the South African delegation made strides in reshaping the narrative, highlighting vital investment opportunities and altering perceptions. The potential of the African Continental Free Trade Area is accompanied by a surge in economic activities and trade relations, positioning South Africa to secure a prosperous future for its young and rapidly growing population. As South Africa prepares for the G20 and B20 summits, the outcomes of the World Economic Forum are expected to guide pivotal discussions.
And so we shoot straight into those pivotal discussions right now of those outcomes that are expected to drive key achievements for the African continent. And I'm having it with an expert panel I did allude to. Let me show you and introduce you to them right now. Beginning with the gentleman seated on my left, Mr. Neville Mikey, the Chief Executive Officer of Brand South Africa. We are also joined by Sthembiso Dlamini, the CEO of Gauteng Tourism Authority. We have Luthando Vuba, the Group Head of International Trade at Business and Commercial Banking for the Standard Bank Group. Ms. Zoleka Lisa, Vice President of Corporate Affairs at South African Breweries. And last but not least, Johnson Idoso, the Group Chief Information and Technology Officer at APSA, who will be joining us virtually. And perhaps, Zoleka, I'm going to begin with you. You're the freshest face I remember from Davos this time around, which wasn't so cold. I don't know what your sentiments are. But we speak about virtual, and it's quite poignant, just given the fact that the theme for this year's World Economic Forum was collaboration in the intelligent era. So we went in knowing that these are the conversations that we were going to hear more about in terms of collaboration and in terms of this intelligent era that we know is being driven by all sorts of these technologies, AI, quantum computing, blockchain. You know them better than I. That's how we went in. How do you reckon we came out in terms of some of your key highlights and key outcomes of the 55th WEF?
Fifi, well, it was a much warmer Davos, and I think we brought a bit of the African warmth to Switzerland this time. When we left, I think as Team South Africa, the mood firstly was a lot different. It was one of, I think, a very clear message to take to Davos. It was one of proof points. We were very clear that we had examples of what's happened since the last Davos, and the discussion around energy was one of pride because we could articulate what has been done and what the outcome was. You asked a question at the breakfast and said, can we just recall how many days of no load shedding? And the room sort of went silent because everyone was like, oh, we've stopped counting.
Sure.
You know, and I think going in that sense is confident going in, and coming out was even stronger. What I enjoyed most was the fact that technology and innovation are top of mind globally. As a company who invests aggressively in R&D, we're an agribusiness. We want to make sure that our farmers have the best technology to endure all the climate challenges that they're facing. Our products are some of the best for our consumers so that we meet our consumer needs. There was a lot around those discussions, which is quite inspiring. So I think coming back, if you're not innovating, you're not investing in technology, you will be left behind. And it's something as a country we have to prioritize. I would also then say, secondly, collaboration. The how we are going about in solving some of the challenges is coming out so strong. The partnership you're seeing between government and the private sector is becoming a model of how we're overcoming things. So we focus on a specific challenge, we put together a strong team, we measure, we communicate, and we really drive relentless execution of that strategy. So coming out very strong around innovation and collaborating with strong hows to do those type of things.
Sure, and I think that, I mean, in terms of her saying that we exported the African sun and the warmth to Davos this time around. I mean, one can look at it differently, just given the fact that we do know that climate is a major risk right now, and it was a concern that it didn't snow as much. And I remember there was a particular day in the week, the Thursday, where it snowed, and everybody, including Africans, was excited about the snow, although it just lasted a couple of minutes or so. But I say that it's possible that we did export it, because if we look at the size and the prominence that SA House had on the promenade this time around, you couldn't miss us if you were there. And Neville, I'm going to come to you in just a short while about maybe some of the wins that we perhaps brought home as a result of having such a prominent position on the promenade. But I want to stick to business in just a short while. And Lutando, so Zolika was making reference of the pre-WEF breakfast, in which business usually meets, and governments meet, and society meets, labor meets, the academia meets, and we just talk about what message we're taking to the rest of the world. And I've had the privilege of facilitating the breakfast before the elections, and I had the privilege of facilitating the breakfast after the elections. And I say it's a privilege because I was able to measure the sentiment change that was in the room, and it was a lot more confident this time around. But Lutanda, I'll put it to you to say that the Standard Bank Group has been taking a glass half full approach to South Africa's situation, even when things were not their best. And I imagine that the confidence in terms of the level in that glass is a lot higher right now, just given the fact that we are on the journey of correcting quite a lot of things that were weighing us down. But maybe speak to us from a group perspective in terms of the sentiment that was conveyed by some of your international partners at the Standard Bank Group, and I know that you were representing the continent as well. What were some of the key takeaways?
Thank you. I think the view and perception from the group on Africa will remain bullish and remain bullish, in perpetuity. We do strongly believe that it is the African century, and we don't just say it. It's there. It's in the projections. We see it in the mega trends. That it's truly poised. That when you look globally, the next growth leap is coming from this continent, and we've got all the right sort of tools in our ambit. We blessed minerals-wise. We have a growing younger population, really positioned us favorably globally. So I think when we are taking that view, we truly believe it is not just something that's taken lightly. And our purpose is Africa as a home, we drive our growth. So I think when we look at WEF and where the discussions were on looking at technology and innovation, but underlying all of that is also policy. I think I need to highlight the policy reforms and the pace at which the South African government has moved on those structural reforms is really what tells a very compelling story. Because other parts of the world is that there is a journey and it takes a bit of time. So I think it's very encouraging. It does uplift the confidence level significantly. So when you talk about that glass half full just being pitched a bit higher,
sure.
It is those, and then I like what she said around proof points. So we're not just saying it because there's a bit of improvement. There's significant improvement that we've seen in terms of the ports in Durban, the work being done there, and also around the point that you touched on when it comes to energy and other reforms. So I think that's what really should get us all in the room and those dialing online truly positive and optimistic around what lays ahead. And I think the pace will continue to be propelled by the collaboration. So we're seeing collaboration at the government level when it comes to the South African government, and now it's constituted this government of national unity that's cascading down with a key partner in the economy, which is private sector. And there are these willing hands with rolled up sleeves to say, let's figure it out, let's resolve our issues. So I think when you look at the other issues societally, when it comes to job creation, that naturally then starts to also uplift in that area. So I think it's truly an optimism that is based on concrete evidence that we should all be bullish about.
So you, as Gauteng, representing the economic hub of South Africa, the economic hub, but many can agree, of the African continent, just in terms of its size and the value of GDP, went through with a squad, as it were, quite a big contingent, and I'm sure it was very intentional, and I'm sure there were KPIs that you had put on yourselves as Gauteng Tourism to bring home. Maybe just talk to us about that, the purpose of your visit as Gauteng Tourism to Davos this year, and what you think you came home with.
Thank you so much, Fifi. I need to mention that Gauteng was in Davos for the very first time. So, in fact, the leadership of Gauteng, when they looked at WEF, we said Gauteng has been out of the global stage for quite some time. We really need to start looking at those stages that are going to position, Gauteng as that economic hub. I mean, we were quite bullish about it. The fact that the key message that we took there is that Gauteng, contributes about 35% to the GDP of this country. But most importantly, a message which says, if we were a country as a province, would be the 7th largest economy in the continent. So I think it's one of the most important province to actually take into these global platforms. We do know that a platform such as World Economic Forum is normally a national play, but the leadership felt that whilst the national leadership does represent all provinces, it's important for Gauteng to be there. But also, I think one of the wins that we wanted to get out with is around the brand positioning of brand Gauteng, so that we're known. I mean, the G20 summit will be held here in Johannesburg. The province has got some historical cities. Johannesburg is known. It's a brand on its own. The JSE is here. You've got Pretoria, which is the capital, the administrative capital, which must be known as well, and it is in Gauteng. And the fact that we do have that infrastructure, one of the key strategies that we have as a province is that we want to boost the visitor economy, including business and investment, through bidding and hosting mega events, whether it's business events or other lifestyle events, whether it's sporting, because we believe that that would be a catalyst to actually start moving investment. I mean, there we spoke about, we were given an opportunity to actually launch our investment conference that is coming up in April, Gauteng Investment Conference. And I think MEC Maile, the MEC for Finance and Economic Development, spoke extensively about some of the projects, that would be out there, for potential investors to look at. One that I can, top of mind is Gauteng, which remains the pride of this province, but also the pride of the country. The fact that there is an expansion, expansion plan, but also that fast train, between Gauteng and Limpopo is one of it. We spoke about how Gauteng is that automotive hub with our project Tazas in Pretoria, where the Ford Ranger is being manufactured. So there are a whole lot of projects that we're embarking on as a province. But those projects are not known, and we felt that this platform at WEF gives us that opportunity to actually engage with decision makers, but also potential investors, and begin to actually find leads for for our investment conference that is coming up in April.
Okay, and I'll come back to you just in terms of what the reception was to some of the pictures that you did present. I do know in terms of positioning Gauteng as a major sporting hub as well, the Minister of Sports is working quite hard on the F1. The race is heating up there, but I see that he secured further investments. Good luck to him, may he win. Neville, so you weren't there because he's the recently appointed CEO of Brand South Africa. Congratulations to you, sir. What a wonderful year to start the new year, and we do wish you well. But while you were sorting out moving into your office and the T's and C's of your contracts and everything else in terms of getting yourself affair with your portfolio, your team was there. Your team was being led by your chairperson, and let me tell you, as we mentioned with Soleka, we had quite a considerable prominence on the promenade. There was hosting of a whole host of international investors who came through. There was various events, and I can tell you that I think the South African scarf and the beanie is like one of the most oversubscribed things, because now you end up greeting people in South African language, and you find they're not South African because they just wore a scarf with pride.
Yeah.
But maybe you can just tell us, I mean, in the debrief with your colleagues that came through from Davos, what was said in terms of what stood out as a key outcome for Brand South Africa?
No, thank you, Fifi. I think just as a start, to thank the private sector and to thank government. I think the collaboration aspect that was mentioned earlier, it was actually quite visible. We wouldn't have had that prominence if we didn't have also the support of the private sector that came on board to say, yes, South Africa needs to be placed in a prominent position for us to say, Sifikile. We are here, and we need to be seen that we are here. So I think that was very important. It was very strategic on our part to ensure that we have a home and a base for all South Africans, including the private sector that wanted to have bilateral meetings with some companies outside of the platform of WEF. And that is what essentially we created as Brand South Africa. And it was really quite positive. The feedback that I have received also from the private sector has been quite positive in terms of the networks that have been created. Some of the platforms that we hosted, as you've indicated, did not have, and you see, we always run this risk of when you run a program, then you have only government people. So we were deliberate in minimizing government officials, but maximizing the presence of international investors and the private sector, to a point where we had to remove officials off tables because if you remember, the South African dinner was oversubscribed, including our partners within the African continent. What is critical for us now is focusing on G20. That is the direction we need to lead towards, and ensuring that we are ready for G20. Our colleagues in Gauteng have clearly made the message quite clear that they are ready to host. But as a country, are we ready in terms of the discussions, as well as how we're going to position the country? I think the president made a lot of pronouncements in his speech at Davos in terms of the focus of G20. Of course, trade being quite important for us, particularly positioning of Africa as a continent, because he was quite clear the G20 is not only a South African platform, is an African platform. So we need to really create those strides to link with AfTA, and as well as other platforms within the AU, to position Africa as a magnet to increase trade within Africa. The second one is obviously investment. which is quite critical to attract investors into critical sectors. But what is quite interesting about our G20 agenda is the focus also on health and health systems and the improvement, because that in itself creates a platform for companies who would like to invest in the pharmaceutical sector and that health sector. We do have obviously our own in South Africa, but we want to see more really participating. And of course, the last one being the climate change and investments associated with that. I mean, we've done a lot in terms of positioning ourselves from a green hydrogen perspective. We've got anchor projects. You'll see quite a lot in the Eastern Cape, in the Western Cape, as well as in Limpopo that have been driven. We need to position those and ensure that they're investor ready. I think there we've got to deal with the legislative issues so that by the time we get to G20, a lot of the projects that are located in those provinces are able to cross the line. Because at the moment, these projects are mostly seen as a 2, 3, or 5 year turnaround in terms of the investment cycle, and we need to turn those around. If we can do it before we get to the G20, by the time we get to the G20 and the B20, we're able to announce those projects. And then lastly is obviously our drive, led by our president in terms of investors, because we are not removing our foot off that accelerator pedal. The targets that have been created and positioned by the president, supporting the DTIC to ensure that we can ensure that we achieve and exceed those targets.
So we'll get into that as well in just a short while, but maybe just to get in an opening remark as well from Johnson. Are you there, sir? Perfect. And so I'm thinking, obviously the intelligent era, the intelligent age, it was all about technology, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, all of that. And you'll tell me what stood out for you. I'm wondering if the conversations at WEF would have been a little bit different had the bombshell that is DeepSeek launched during WEF. Because I actually look at it as a positive, just in terms of what can be achieved for Africa's growth agenda using technology at a lower cost. But before we get there, just your key takeaways in terms of the intelligent era and what was discussed, sir.
Thank you for accommodating me virtually. Real pleasure to be with you. I'll start by concurring with all my fellow panelists. I thought South Africa was incredibly well represented at WEF. It was really a proud moment. Africa in general was also well represented. I spoke to people from Nigeria, Uganda, Tanzania, really great representation, and lots of excitement about G20 from the constituents from the African continent. I thought our president gave a very confident, collected, calm speech to the Congress Hall, very clear on our ambitions for G20, solidarity, equality, and sustainability. And again, I think in the world we live in, really, really important. Closer to what you asked me, Fifi, I walked away with three top-of-mind things from WEF. The first is there is a lot of uncertainty amongst the leadership, and it's not just to do with politics or macro politics. There's uncertainty around the role of technology, of course, but also climate change, regulation. So that was one very clear theme, but that does not mean leaders are paralyzed. One of the things I've said in my feedback within ABSA is the urgency to make decisions and move with speed is very, very clear. The second to the point you led on is technology, and I smiled as soon as you mentioned DeepSeek, because the rate at which technology is changing is definitely exponential. It's not an overused word. And certainly AI is becoming embedded in everything, everywhere, and that's going to happen very quickly. I personally think in 3 to 5 years, we will not talk about AI because it will just be embedded. And for us on the continent, I think the opportunities are very young population. The point you made, I'll come on to about competition in a second, I think is critical. This technology is getting cheaper very, very rapidly. And that does mean barriers to entry, which previously might have prevented some of our adoption, start to erode. So I think there's a fantastic opportunity for this continent, for South Africa, to really steal a march on how we think about adopting AI. And then the third point is what you opened with, Fifi, increasing competition. And fundamentally, my view is that's a good thing for consumers and customers. And DeepSeek is the very best example of that. Literally the cost to use DeepSeek versus the other models is something like 100th. And when you have that sort of phenomenal change, it's clearly disruptive, but also presents a great opportunity.
For me, as I'm sure everyone in this room, I've been listening to the various analysis around DeepSeek, but a key takeaway, because I believe that Alibaba has also brought in a similar product as well, that it claims is even better than DeepSeek, which claims to be better than ChatGPT. But key takeaway is the fact that the cost of developing some of these solutions have come down. And we do know that cost has been a constraint for many economies, including economies on the African continent, which are pretty cash-strapped in terms of how much they have to meet their competing needs. We'll come back to you in just a short while, Johnson, but maybe let's actually talk about our continent and the country in which we stand, real talk. Because in as much as we had a lot to offer, we went to the world having put together a coalition government. We heard from our president, a coalition government in record time. There are countries in Europe that are still trying to, a year later, decide how to work together collectively as parties. We did that in a month with the Government of National Unity. You can talk to me maybe about maybe concerns, particularly this week, regarding the stability of the GNU. But from what we're hearing as journalists, it seems all parties are still committed to holding to the GNU. It's just they want to be listened to, and they want sort of a better reception, as it were. But we went in with that. We went in with the G20 presidency, the very first African country to hold the G20. It's a big thing, and South Africa has positioned it as Africa's G20, which is absolutely fantastic. We went in with that. We went in something that we have always had for some time, a youth dividend and a demographic, the future workforce that we are told that is very agile and very eager and very curious and wanting to know a lot more about this technology. Perhaps it's just a matter of matching them with the right skills so that they can be a lot more relevant to your workers. So we went in with a whole lot of good things, but we also went in with problems still. Our economy is growing. The latest report from the International Monetary Fund released yesterday following their recent visit is forecasting growth of 1.5% for South Africa's economy this year. This is from their forecast of 0.8% this year. So maybe a little bit about to double. Fingers crossed everything stays the same, and we do get that. But it's still weak compared to how we should be growing. We know that we still have a very big problem when it comes to structural issues, the infrastructure backlog. We do know that, yes, we could be out the worst in terms of the electricity crisis, but one has to question whether we're completely out the woods, which even the electricity ministry have said that still work needs to be done. So we still have a lot of issues still. And I'm just wondering, as we presented the investment case and as we do continue to present the investment case to investors, what are they saying about some of our challenges still? And Zoleka, I want to ask you, because you are part of one of the biggest entities that are listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, one of the biggest companies in the world, AB InBev. To the challenges still that are holding the economy back, what are some of your colleagues in the bigger entity saying about it?
I think a very important question. I think we've spoken a lot around a very successful Davos, but we also still come back to reality. And we have to build from what we've learned. I think it's not about now resting on our laurels, waiting for G20 and all of those good things. It's really about progress and momentum. And there are some learnings and things that we need to pay forward. So I think we've now spoken a lot around the energy crisis that is now under control, but what are we doing around local government? What can we learn in what we've done with energy that we can pay forward in local government, in water, et cetera, et cetera? So I think there's an opportunity now to apply, scale, and drive serious momentum in that regard. And if you think of multinationals looking to the continent, they really do still see the potential and the opportunity. That is no doubt. If you think of our business and we just look at the African continent, the agricultural opportunity is huge. The youth potential to drive inclusive growth is huge. South Africa is a very developed industrial opportunity, so there's so much going for us. I think it's now a matter of making sure the proof points, Fifi, in the other areas translate to fundamentally not change a narrative, but change an experience. So when an investor does come into the country, it's not about I'm still trying to figure out if the water will work, if the ports will be functioning. It's my experience is that these sectors are efficient, and if I invest, I will see how my return will transpire. So I think the opportunity is very much still seen, but I think there's a lot of momentum required. And I think G20 is giving us the right pressure. It's now time for us to really make sure that government is doing its part, we're doing our part, and the country, it's an all-end game, to be honest. Yeah.
I mean, as a banker, Lutando, you would have been aware of some of the results coming out of your peers over in the US, and what has stood out in terms of their reporting series, in their reporting season, is the activity in their corporate and investment banking unit. The cost of capital has come down, although there's questions as to how much further it comes down right now. But the world is in a little bit of a better place when it does come to the cost of capital and growth. A little bit of a better place, and I know you'll tell me it depends where you're looking. But the message that has been coming across is that the environment for making deals is ripe. And if you're talking about the fact that it's the century for Africa right now, the environment for more multinationals outside of ABNB and all of that is ripe to come through. Yet, I was speaking to a company yesterday and they said, you know, Fifi, I hear the fact that things have gotten better, but my cost of compliance right now, because we're still on the grey list, is a whole lot more. And that's also limiting me from doing certain things that I could be doing to aid more growth in this country. Our Treasury has committed to trying to get us off the grey list by this year. Fingers crossed that it will happen. But also, in terms of you and just putting a little bit of real talk into some of the issues and the challenging areas that we still have as a bank, what are they and what are you hoping to see?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So, grey list point is a very key one. And it comes around the theme of, I mean, we can talk cost of capital, but it's also the reality of what we need to comply with. And I think what you comply with and what that standing is also then impacts in your sovereign rating. And when you look at the continent, that has a direct impact to the access to finance. So if you're in a particular country and your risk grade is sitting at a certain grade, it directly impacts, you know, the flows that can go into that market. Therefore, access to FX when they want to then trade is a direct limitation. I mean, you just have to look at Nigeria, what has been happening over the past 3 years, having a significant impact on their ability to pay out because of the lack of forex in the market. So I think we in South Africa still have a way to go on some of these. But I want to link that to compliance, but also the other cost that is directly impacting businesses, which is the cost of doing business operationally. The challenges we've been having at the port and the pivots that has had to introduce is also directly impacting business. The Middle East conflict, Red Sea, and now having to reroute the shipping that is accessing Europe also is directly impacting. And all of these things that I'm mentioning all happened in the last 1 to 2 years. And still, we are still there. There's been improvements at Durban Port, but they're still not at where it should be, at least where it really espouses us to retain the position or regain the position of being the dominant player when it comes to logistics in the southern part of the continent. So I think that's for us what we are seeing almost parallel to that point around the cost of compliance. And for a big business, there may be something that you can work in and look at, but you think about the small business and what that means for them. The impact of the load shedding, we know, has actually put out some of the SMEs because the sheer cost and impact of it was just, and for them, they were unable to bear. And I think what we need is an agility from both a policy and also a government response in these events, and how do you better support that base? Because you look at any developed economy, it's really having a good base of your SMEs that are growing, because they are the largest employers in any economy. So I think there we need to build in a bit of agility with the government, how quickly we respond to some of these. You mentioned the point around it being a ripe environment for deals and looking at and big business, looking at the continent, looking where to invest. In particular, South Africa, I would agree with that sentiment. The IMF is projecting a very sort of conservative projection around South Africa's growth at 1.4%, but equally the EIU, which does a lot of work in this space, is projecting that by 2026 South Africa could hit 3%, and I think we should take them equally as serious. And when you look at that, where more or less that could land, let's say it's a 2+%, that's already a significant impact, because what we've seen over the past 2 to 3 years, or even 4, is around hovering that 1% mark. So I do think that the pace that we have seen to set up GNU, to collaborate with government on the electricity issue, or it is the infrastructure when it comes to transport, rail and the ports, should be almost like a the approach we have on all the other issues that are still outstanding. And I think we need to prioritize making sure we meet the requirements of the Financial Action Task Force so that we can get off the grey list. But in line with that also, how do we put in the right then measures to make sure that that is an addressed matter when it comes to the financial sector in the country. So I think for me the point around pace. The other one I think I just want to touch on it as well is when it comes to the theme of WEF, which is the age of technology, AI and the technologies. But I have to call out that there's still an underinvestment in digital infrastructure. There's still an underinvestment there's now gaps in infrastructure that will help and enable that. The continent is still sitting at 38% of Africans that can access the internet. So I think that's great, and certainly there's leaps that certain parts of our economies can take. I can see there's opportunity to leapfrog some of the development that we need to see and to enable industrialization, but I think we need to move faster and see more investment into the infrastructure and the digital enablement.
I'm really watching that space. And again, I draw back to DeepSeek. And I wonder to what degree the underinvestment has been driven by the fact that it costs so much to invest in the space. And now that we know things can be a little bit cheaper, whether there will be a change in sentiment. But that is let's wait and see. But Simiso, to come to you, just to pick up on the points that both of the captains and the leaders from the private sector have made, by way of making South Africa a more conducive environment to do business. We've got a lot going for us, and we do know that there was a lot that was expressed via positive sentiment from the business delegation. And I must say, for me also, I was like, absolutely proud of the patriotic stance that they did take in sending and pitching South Africa as a place to do business. But they also had to face questions around the risks in the areas in which we have had problems for a very, very long time. Zoleka mentioned some of the issues around local government. Lutando mentioned issues that came up regarding the GNU, and some people might have said on the international stage, yes, you guys came up with a record coalition government, but we've seen coalition governments fall, and what makes you guys any different? I suppose, ma'am, it's a question around how your team fended questions around the political framework, the governance framework, the accountability framework to the investors that you pitched the various projects to, and what you told them.
I think the most important thing for me to just mention is that South Africa is a country went there with a lot of confidence. I really agree with my other colleagues and what you said earlier, and I think our positioning was quite clear. We're here as part of South Africa. And we're not shying away from some of the problems that you've already raised, the energy, cost of doing business, particularly for SMEs. But one of the priorities that we have in Gauteng is how do we then drive the economy, inclusive economy, as opposed to just growing the economy. We need new entrants into various markets and various sectors. So our responses was quite clear. We're not shying away from the problems. We think the country is stable, and you do know that obviously, Gauteng was under discussions, during that time, and that Gauteng as a government, we do support the GNU, and some of the priorities that obviously the president spoke about are part of the priorities of Gauteng. But I think it was quite clear, a clear message that we took that unless we take the SMEs with and actually create a conducive environment for them to grow and to participate in the formal economy, because they are, the highest employers. We're not going to realize the dream of this growth that we're looking for as a country. As a result, some of the discussions that were happening there around technology, the questions that we were asking ourselves is how do we then utilize technology for market access? Issue that they have is they don't have that market access because of lack of digital footprint. But also, one of the key priorities of Gauteng, government is how do we then enhance other revenue collection mechanism using technology. There's a lot of leakages because things are still manualized and all that. So some of the discussions that happened, they really assisted us to come back and say, how do we tap into some of the discussions that were happening, AI and technology, to assist our small businesses, but also to assist ourselves, as government, to drive that efficiency, particularly when it comes to service. So you mentioned the issue around local government, and I think our province takes the whole issue of intergovernmental relations quite seriously. At least within the economic development, we do meet quite regularly, a meeting led by the MEC with mayors of various metros, as well as MMCs of various local economic development units within our 5 key regions. That shows the commitment that we have as a province, that we're not going to we do understand that there's 3 spheres of government, and we understand that local government has got its autonomy, but if local government doesn't work, we can't talk about a Gauteng economy. So those are the things that we took, and then we're quite open to say, we're open to business. Gauteng is open, for business. South Africa is open for business, but we're also open to be, guided in certain instances where we can't, but also to receive, that aid of, ideas and knowledge in specific areas which remain a challenge in our country and in our province.
Okay. Fantastic. And I think that you have maybe wrapped up enough some of the areas that we need to work on right now. We have spoken about the opportunities, and I think that in terms of the challenges, it has given a balanced perspective. So I am going to pivot to the G20 more, if I may. It's Africa's G20, right? And I had the opportunity, or CNBC Africa had the opportunity at WEF to speak with quite a number of representatives from the African continent. We spoke with the representatives from Zimbabwe. We spoke with the president of Botswana. We spoke with representatives and key ministers from Nigeria. And there was a general excitement about this G20. And I know that we're going to be seeing a lot more of them in the weeks and the months to come. Maybe help us understand, drawing from your experience in investment promotion, G20, Africa's G20, what are some of the actions that you guys are taking right now to ensure it's a successful one for the country, but as well as the continent?
It's quite important to understand that with the G20, and I think the whole positioning of the G20 as an Africa G20 is quite important. And the way in which the president had actually outlined some of the key principles related to how we're planning towards the G20. There's different streams that have been created in partnership with business, because G20 will not be successful unless the business side is also successful. So the business is quite involved, quite aggressive in that regard. And with them being aggressive, it has really assisted in aligning the priorities of the country. So from an investment promotion perspective, the pronouncements that were made by the president, such as within the climate change sector, as I've mentioned, if you're looking at the green hydrogen space, there isn't enough that is done. But when you look at it in the background, and I'm going to just backtrack a little bit to your earlier question, what are the systemic challenges? You look at over-regulation, or the slowness of uptake in terms of securing the financial markets to actually support these new industries. And we will have all these opportunities, but unless you have the financial backing to get the projects off the ground, we're going to find ourselves still having a discussion around the ICT sector. Why is it so slow? The whole green energy sector, why is it so slow? That is where the crux of the matter is. And
You're saying we need a Department of Government Efficiency.
And business efficiency too. And business efficiency is quite critical, because unless you unlock the finances, because the projects are there, the opportunities are there, it's going to be rather critical to really cross them, take them over the line. When you're looking at climate change, for example, and the impact of climate change in South Africa in particular, you look at what happened in KwaZulu-Natal, in the Eastern Cape, the climate change, and we now are at a position where we can almost anticipate another flood. other fires, etc. How are we ready now to ensure that we can create adequate infrastructure that can accommodate the 1 in 50 that has now become a 1 in 10 or a 1 in 5? You see, those are the new opportunities, and it's really as a result of climate change. And that is where partnership with the private sector can come into play, especially the international, the foreign direct investment, where they have experienced such, they can be able to assist either municipalities and government to ensure that our infrastructure is ready to cope with such impacts of climate change. And then the other component of course, the G20 are the discussions around regulatory and bilateral as well as multilateral trade aspects. If you look at Africa in itself, the issue around the increasing African trade, and I know the Secretary General Wamkele Mene is trying to work really hard in terms of easing trade within the African continent, but you still have systemic challenges in terms of moving goods from one country to the other. How do we unlock those, including the air services? And as you know, if you're flying just from Abidjan to Cairo, it's either you go through Dubai or you go into Ghana. You must overnight for you to catch the flight the next day. Yet the distance is so short. We need to ensure that from a G20 perspective, even opening of the skies, we're able to position Africa and have more airlines flying easily within the continent. The more you're able to move the people, the easier you're able to fill the belly of the aircraft, because that is where the trade comes in.
And the easier you're able to get finance from the likes of
Correct.
Standard Bank,
Yeah.
because that is where the risk is also minimized.
And they've got the money.
And then, they themselves and Absa Bank as well. And Johnson, maybe to bring you in here as well before we open up to the room for maybe a few comments or questions, as we're left with around 5 or 10 minutes or so before we do wrap up. But maybe to double down on the point that Neville was making around further participation of the private sector in this equation, not only the equation of making South Africa great again, or the equation of MAGA. I think we need to, or has he IP'd that? I love that. I love it though. I think it's relevant to us as well. Make Africa great again. But we're going to have to make sure that we buy that IP or do something, else we get sued. So he's talking about greater participation, essentially a greater holding of hands between yourselves and government. We've already seen it taking place. But I suppose from your vantage point, what do you reckon can be done to strengthen this kumbaya that we are experiencing right now?
I would say a couple of things. I want to comment on where we were beginning to go to about collaboration on the African continent. That is one of the things that came across very, very clearly. And, the 50-plus nations on the African continent, we need to use the G20 and African Union presence at that as a vehicle to drive that, whether it's in regulation, free trade, etc. I spoke to a number of executives, for example, in Microsoft about investment on the continent. And the answer simply is, the more you collaborate, the more we will be able to invest. So that's one thing I do think is important. I mean, I can speak for Absa, and I've heard my colleague from Standard Bank say the same. We are very much a Pan-African business. So our home is Africa, and we're intertwined with the success of the African continent. So our ambition is to invest in the future of this continent, obviously with presence in markets where there's capital flows. So obviously the New York market, the London market, the Beijing market, and funnel those into the continent. I do think it's very important. So before I go into skills, which I want to talk about, we will invest in areas, for example, like data centers. And again, I'm sure Absa is not unique in this. So a lot of the fundamental infrastructure we need to unlock this growth, the digital infrastructure, absolutely, you see the banks are investing in as we speak, and we must do more of. And then the final thing I think really the public sector and the private sector really must do is we continue to invest in building our own skills, because we can see we're preparing for a world where the cost of the technology is not the issue. Access to the technology will be an issue, and then skills in how to exploit the technology will be the issue. So I think those 2-3 things could really materially help us just continue this forward momentum we all feel.
I mean, when you talk about the skills, you remind me of a conversation that we also had with the CEO of NASPA South Africa, Ms. Puti Mahangele there, in Davos, who was talking exactly to that. NASPA is not talking up its book, but doing quite a bit to invest in the digital skills landscape as well, but also talking about the big gap that still remains nonetheless. Johnson, if I can ask you to hit mute for a second or two as we open up for questions, so don't be too far from the mute button in case a question comes your way, sir. If they are asking for money, I'll make sure that it's something that you don't have to answer. But are there any questions or comments that want to be made by the audience in the room before we wrap up this discussion?
I'm Pindi Dejani from Telkom, Executive for Corporate Affairs. I just want to foreground maybe my question with a few comments. There have been some very good insights from the panel. And Zoleka mentioned that innovation and technology are quite exciting. And you know that with innovation and the private sector, we are always ahead of government, of the public policymakers. And also, now we're in the era of the GNU, and it is said that somewhere it doesn't matter whether the cat is black or white, as long as can catch the mice, we work with it. We work with DA now, we work with any other. So my issue is that with the entire public policy space, do we need probably some form of compacts with government so that they commit for the next 5 years or next 3 years or so, where you know that when you invest, there will not be return on investments. That's the problem we have now with the GNU. There has to be a reset of the rules at the local level. Now take it back straight to the G20. What is the Africa G20 in essence means content-wise? What do you bring in on the table? As Telkom, I have the same problem, CEO. My call will go to Paris before it goes to Senegal. So we've got similar problems. So another policy uncertainty, when the US has become the president of G20, if Trump comes in, will hold the agenda be turned upside down. So we need the GNU certainty. How do you make sure the certainty with the G20 itself? Is there a threat when the USA becomes a truck? So these are just the elements I want to raise, if you guys can comment on that. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Margaret Tanga. I'm part of Africa Desk. I think mine is directed at Gauteng Tourism and Brand South Africa. Quick, low-hanging fruits. We've got all the embassies outside of Washington, D.C. that are based here. And if really this is the G20 of Africa, to what extent are we engaging them intentionally, seeing that they do have monthly briefings, etc.? But I think more for you, Stembisa, is then what are the key learnings from how Davos was hosted that we can bring to the fore as we are preparing to host as South Africa, but also as Gauteng? What are those key learnings? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I'll start with the last one.
Yep.
I think one of the things that for me was a key learning, from Davos is how the organizers or WEF is able to actually integrate communities. I mean, sustainability around communities. What do I mean by that? They also use a strategy for pricing and demand to actually drive what we call in tourism geographic spread. So to stay in Davos is quite expensive. So meaning you're being pushed to actually stay in surrounding areas, which means that everybody benefits. But that, enabling infrastructure that is required. So the transport system should actually work and be integrated. The issue of safety. So delegates must actually feel that they are safe, moving in and out of the conference and their meetings. But also just collaboration with private sector and the municipalities. So I don't know what it's called there, but here you've got local government, provincial and national. There it was quite seamless. So those are some of the key learnings. However, you saw a conference or an event that was quite publicized, but also owned by the locals. And that's a very same thing that we've got to do. I gave an example to say it might be a summit might be hosted at the Sandton Convention Center, but nothing stops us from saying delegates can actually put up in Pretoria. Because we've got Gautrain, so in 25 minutes you can be in, at the Sandton station and walk to Sandton Convention Center. So those are some of the things. How do we ensure that, the value chain, particularly small businesses, form part of actually staging, a G20 summit that would remember? One of the key things that we know, Margaret, is that we battle, the biggest perception is around crime. Biggest crime and grime. Well, somehow it's, because we amongst the countries that can actually hold a press conference and talk about our crime stats. Brazil doesn't do it, and it doesn't mean that it's safer than us. So we can debate that, and we're not saying that there's no crime. Of course, it actually affects our opportunity to drive the visitor economy that we want. So you asked, what are the key learnings? Those are some of the learnings: community beneficiation, making sure that this summit is open. A man in the street can actually tell you how they benefit from that particular summit. So nothing stops us. I mean, the summit will be held in Sandton. People live in Sandton. Their hotels are in Sandton. They eat around Sandton. So how do we beneficiate someone from Alex? How do we beneficiate someone who is in Mamelodi? So those are some of the things that are the key learnings.
Okay. I know you want to answer, but I just would like to draw our attention to the fact that I think we're around 2 minutes left. And so your answer is going to help wrap us up. And I think that the gentleman from Telkom had a really important point around basically security of investment by the compact, either under the GNU or by the G20, such that after 4 or 5 years, things are not reversed and undone. Your thinking on what that could potentially look like?
100%, but I wouldn't even call it a compact. I think we need to have key deliverables that we can measure in the short term, and short term should be 1 to 6 months, medium term, a year, and then the long term can be beyond a year. But within the short term and the medium term, we've got to look at all the things that we know that within the 5 years, we can see how we push them into the short and medium term and achieve them within the year. Next year, we have the same type of compact, because as soon as we say compact for the next 5 years, we're only going to start counting on year 5. So it's more important that you bring everything closer so that you achieve your delivery much quicker and much faster. And the last thing is the issue around the US and the likes. I think it's an opportunity for us to look at further collaboration, because remember, after 4 years, there'll be a new administration. It doesn't mean that if there are any changes, drastic changes, that they are for a lifetime. But within any change, you look for new opportunities to foster the relations between ourselves and the US. I see it positively. And then from my sister there, I think the most important thing about WEF, the G20 coming to South Africa, is, as indicated, Gauteng will benefit obviously because the summit is held here, but the B20 is in the Western Cape, and there will be side programs that will be developed for other regions as well within South Africa as a precursor leading to the G20 summit, the actual summit here, and the B20 in the Western Cape. So that's where we need to ensure that we maximize on the benefit for the country.
Let's not forget your hometown. And I've got to go. I've got to run. So who's going quicker?
The issue of the embassies. I must say that the 92 international missions are actually headquartered in Tshwane.
Sure.
So we've got to take that opportunity. You're right.
Sure. And I think a perfect point to pause. And I say pause deliberately the conversation because clearly there's a lot more that can be said. But thank goodness for the invention of this platform. We credit our MD at the ABN Group, Ms. Roberta Naika, and we're hoping to have similar such conversations, as I said, on a monthly basis. But for now, from us, thanks so much for listening and have yourselves a wonderful day further. And of course, that extends to our wonderful social media audience who have also tuned in. Goodbye.